How's it going, guys? Give me a second to get the chats up and jump right into this patron only. Normally patron only secret stream, but maybe once or twice a year. Well, hold on a second. Let me wait for this to go live, see if it does it. I'm getting weird messages every time. I don't know why my system's having such a hard time running two streams. Something happened. All right, well, I guess it's just not going to work. So we're just going to go with this one stream. That's fine with me. But a couple times a year, I do a promotion for my Patreon where I make one of my secret streams public, and that is today's stream. And I actually started to go through some of this on a public stream a few nights ago, really late at night, towards the end of a really long stream. And it was just really good, so I decided to continue that with my patrons, and then it occurred to me today to go ahead and start it with the public and hopefully entice some of you guys to join the Patreon. We're a demonetized channel, so we get no support unless people join our Patreon or send support via the options in the chat. So we really do appreciate that. And then if you do, you get access to 5 years of secret material, and also you can buy a box of consultation and tutoring in various subjects, guitar lessons, all that stuff. And I'm doing a promotion right now where if you pay for a full year up front, you get 20% off for any of those services. You can't do that through Patreon. You have to do that directly with me, so you can send me an email if you're interested in that. And so for about 4 months, we were going through Masonic Degree 28 in the secret streams. And we used this book here, which actually was one of my most convincing, like, preternatural or parapsychological experiences that I've ever had. And it involved having a dream where this book was on the shelf in a local bookshop, a used bookshop downtown in Durango, Colorado in 2010. And I told my girlfriend that that was the book and where it was going to be because I wanted to witness. And we went down to the bookstore and pulled it right off the shelf exactly where it was in the dream. And so this is the same copy that I have in my lap here. And what's interesting about this degree is that it really mirrors what is the claim in the introduction to the Kybalion, which, by the way, has a stamp in the front that says it was printed from the Chicago Masonic Lodge, the Grand Lodge in Chicago. And so there's like an implied connection between the Kybalion and Freemasonry. And so this degree kind of explains how the original transmission of the secret doctrine, the mystery teachings, started in Syria and Babylonia and found its way to the Hebrew, the tribe of Judea, and then eventually all around the world, and gave rise to all these religions that I think have ultimately proven evil, to put it mildly, honestly. I'm very much opposed to all forms of organized religion, and I think that it's true that the path of Gnosis is really the only way that a person can have any kind of meaningful spiritual life. And what that means is not deciding that you believe in archons and that Sophia is an actual goddess and all of this stuff. There's no dogma, there's no doctrine. Many of the early Gnostics were actually pretending to be Christian because they didn't want to get burned alive. So the perception even that there's like this Gnostic Christianity is not really accurate, I don't think. I think that that was a smokescreen and that they had to do that in order to protect themselves. And so if you do decide to join the Patron, the backlog it took us 4 months to get through degree 28 because I'll read and then I'll talk. And so it takes a long time. But it was really, really amazingly powerful. You know, even having been through it before myself, I was still surprised at the layers and layers of just incredible knowledge and information that are just spooling out of this book. You know, the mysteries in Freemasonry really have always been a sort of compendium of wisdom and occult knowledge that has been stored up by adepts over centuries and centuries and centuries. And the prevailing perception of it created by pop culture is mostly driven by right-wing fundamentalist Christianity. None of it is true. Very little of it is true, at least. And the little bits that are true are generally totally out of context. So it's really ironic and funny to me that the same people that will acknowledge that the secrets have never leaked claim to know what it is and what it does. It's like if you really think about it, it's one of the dumbest spectacles in pop culture. So speaking of Masonic secrets, and this book was formerly secret. There's a stamp in the front that says, Morals and Dogma of the Accepted and Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, prepared for the Supreme Council of the 33rd Degree for the Southern Jurisdiction of the United States and published by its authority. Esoteric book for Scottish Rite use only, to be returned to the lodge upon withdrawal or death of recipient. Authored by Albert Pike, Grand Sovereign Commander from 1859 to 1891. And so on the first page we have what appears to be Hermes with a triangle descending into the top of his head, which is, I don't know how well that's going to come into focus. Let's see. Cool picture. So, Knight of the East and West. This is the first of the philosophical degrees of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, and the beginning of a course of instruction that will fully unveil to you the heart and inner mysteries of Masonry. Do not despair, because you have often seemed on the point of attaining the inmost light, and have as often been disappointed. In all time, truth has been hidden under symbols, and often under a succession of allegories, where veil after veil had to be penetrated before the true light was reached and the essential truth stood revealed. The human light is but an imperfect reflection of a ray of the infinite and divine. We are about to approach those ancient religions which once ruled the minds of men, and whose ruins encumber the plains of the great past, as the broken columns of Palmyra and Tobmor lie bleaching on the sands of the desert. They rise above us, those old, strange, mysterious creeds and faiths, shrouded in the mists of antiquity, and stalk dimly and undefined along the line which divides time from eternity. And forms of strange, wild, startling beauty mingled in the vast throngs of figures with shapes monstrous, grotesque, and hideous. The religion taught by Moses, which, like the laws of Egypt, enunciated the principle of exclusion, borrowed at every period of its existence from all the creeds with which it came in contact, while by the studies of the learned and wise, it enriched itself with the most admirable principles of the religions of Egypt and Asia. It was changed in the wanderings of the people by everything that was most impure or seductive in the pagan manners and superstitions. It was one thing in the time of Moses and Aaron, another in those of David and Solomon, and still another in those of Daniel and Philo. And so he's talking about how the influence of various cultures and tribes and pagan beliefs and superstitions were all sort of inculcated into what ultimately would become Christianity and Judaism and Islam and all of these other sort of things. So this original ray of divine knowledge that came through Thoth and the ancient Syrian and Babylonian adepts and Pythagoras in the East eventually had become so contaminated with all of these other influences that it had sort of become a corrupted version of itself well before anyone ever thought to try to write down the Bible. At the time when John the Baptist made his appearance in the desert near the shores of the Dead Sea, all the old philosophical and religious systems were approximating toward each other, and a general lassitude inclined the minds of all toward the quietude of that amalgamation of doctrines for which the expeditions of Alexander and the more peaceful occurrences that followed, with the establishment in Asia and Africa of many Grecian dynasties and a great number of Grecian colonies, had prepared the way. After the intermingling of different nations, which resulted from the wars of Alexander in 3/4 of the globe, the doctrines of Greece, Egypt, Persia, and India met and intermingled everywhere. All the barriers that had formerly kept the nations apart were thrown down. And while the people of the West readily connected their faith and those of the East, those of the Orient hastened to learn the traditions of Rome and the legends of Athens. So already we have a clue to the reason why degree 27 is called Night of the East and West, because what this is really about is syncretic knowledge. It's about separating the wheat from the chaff in every system of wisdom and knowledge that you find, and then consolidating those things in order to really subject them to the alchemical process of transmutation and convert the lead therein into the gold of higher consciousness. While the philosophers of Greece, except the disciples of Epicurus, were more or less Platonists, they seized eagerly upon the beliefs and doctrines of the East, the Jews and Egyptians. Before then, the most exclusive of all peoples yielded to that eclecticism which prevailed among their masters, the Greeks and Romans. Under the same influences of toleration, even those who embraced Christianity mingled together the old and the new. Christianity and philosophy, the apostolic teachings and the traditions of mythology. The man of intellect, devotee of one system, rarely displaces it with another in purity. The people take such a creed as is offered to them. Accordingly, the distinction between the esoteric and exoteric doctrine, immemorial in other creeds, easily gained a foothold among many of the Christians. And that is a reference to, for example, like the Catholic Church actually has an apoptye, just like the mysteries of the Eleusinian mysteries. You know, there was an inner circle of inner knowledge. And that is still, I believe Protestants also have that. The Jewish rabbis are the sole heirs or stewards, I guess, of Jewish mysticism. It is forbidden for the, I don't remember what it's called, but just the layman class of Jews don't even speak about the mysticism. They know nothing about Jewish mysticism. And I tried to talk to my uncle-in-law, I guess, about it, and he's Jewish, and he was just like, "Stop! We're not allowed to even hear this." That idea of having this inner circle of esoteric knowledge that is not available to the outsiders was actually also inculcated into all these religious systems. And it was held by a vast number, even during the preaching of Paul, that the writings of the apostles were incomplete, that they contained only the germs of another doctrine, which must receive from the hands of philosophy not only the systematic arrangement which was wanting, but all the development which lay concealed therein. The writings of the apostles, they said, in addressing themselves to mankind in general, enunciated only the articles of the vulgar faith, but transmitted the mysteries of knowledge to superior minds, to the elect, mysteries handed down from generation to generation in esoteric traditions, and to this science of the mysteries they gave the name of Gnosis. And Jesus makes a reference to this in the Bible, the character of Jesus. Having been initiated into several lineages of the mysteries, I know what he meant when he said that they will not understand the parables. Christians all seem to think he was talking about somebody else. He meant they won't understand the parables. I understand the parables. That's one of the reasons we have all of these, Protestants and Baptists and all these different what are they called? Denominations of Christianity. But more to the point, there are references to things like the number 666. Let him who hath wisdom, that is, he who knows gematria can figure out what this is. And it's actually Jesus. That is the Antichrist, according to the revelation provided to he who hath wisdom. And there's a lot of other things as well that are known to the initiate, but are not going to be understood by the profane. And there are references to secret teachings also in the Bible that are only given to certain disciples, especially Mary. And I think John mentions it, do not cast pearls before swine. So, this is a very prevalent and persistent characteristic of this system. Superior minds to the elect. The Gnostics derived their leading doctrines and ideas from Plato and Philo, the Zend Avesta and the Kabbalah, and the sacred books of India and Egypt, and thus introduced into the bosom of Christianity the cosmological and theosophical speculations which had formed the larger portion of the ancient religions of the Orient, joined to those of Egypt, Greek, and Jewish doctrines which the Neoplatonists had equally adopted in the Occident. Emanation from the deity of all spiritual beings, progressive degeneration of these beings from emanation to emanation, redemption and return of all to the purity of the Creator, and after the reestablishment of the primitive harmony of all, a fortunate and truly divine condition of all in the bosom of God, such were the fundamental teachings of Gnosticism. And a lot of that is interesting to me because one of the ways that we as scientific illuminists, and I want to make it clear that I don't actually follow a dogma or doctrine, but I do sort of follow the protocol of scientific illuminism, which is to try the best that you can to apply the same level of critical thinking and reason to your spirituality and metaphysics as you would to any other research that you might be doing. So this idea of degeneration of these emanations of spiritual beings from incarnation to incarnation is interesting to me because if you make a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, it happens with DNA without mixing it up. It happens with CDs, any recording that you make. So it actually stands to reason because we observe that phenomena in the physical world with technology. There are the same set of laws governing everything. And so that makes sense, and that's how you see these parallels, and then you can go, okay, there's some similitude here, so, maybe there's something to this idea. There was something else here. Priority, reestablishment, primitive harmony, a fortunate, divine condition. All right, moving on then. In its language corresponded to its origin, full of imagery. It had all the magnificence, the inconsistencies, and the mobility of the figurative style. Behold, it said, the light which emanates from an immense center of light that spreads everywhere its benevolent rays, so do the spirits of light emanate from the divine light. Behold, all the springs which nourish, embellish, fertilize, and purify the earth, they emanate from one and the same ocean. So from the bosom of the divinity emanate so many streams, which form and fill the universe of intelligences. Behold numbers, which all emanate from one primitive number, which is zero, actually. All resemble it, all are composed of its essence, and still vary infinitely. And we actually went through some of this last night from Crowley's commentary on the Book of the Law, where he talks about the second, I think it's the second or the third line in the Book of the Law is every number is infinite, there is no difference, and how that sounds really paradoxical if you don't really analyze it, but then divide by zero, or you can just divide any number infinitely, and you can do that forever, and so that is what is meant by this every number is infinite. And the thing is, if it contains infinity, then it also validates the idea that the all is in the all, because you have this one symbol, but you can open it up forever. And the same is true of divisions of time or temperature. And so we find that there is infinite space in all of the finite points. So this ancient idea that the all is in the all is demonstrable. Your success is your proof. Otherwise, you have not succeeded. Okay, so they still vary infinitely, and utterances decomposable into so many syllables and elements, all contained in the primitive word and still infinitely various, so the world of intelligences emanated from a primary intelligence, and they all resemble it, and yet display an infinite variety of existences. It received and combined the old doctrines of the Orient and the Occident, and it found in many passages of the Gospels and the pastoral letters a warrant for doing so. Christ himself spoke in parables and allegories. John borrowed the enigmatical language of the Platonists, and Paul often indulged in incomprehensible rhapsodies, the meaning of which would only be clear to initiates. It is admitted that the cradle of Gnosticism is probably to be looked for in Syria and even in Palestine. Evidence for that, or at least, Babylonia. Was it Syria or Babylonia? Somewhere in that area. I've mentioned this quite a few times recently, but it's important to those of us that follow this that the Pythagorean theorem was found from 2,000 years before Pythagoras in ancient Babylonia in cuneiform a couple of months ago. And so that connects this lineage of knowledge to the place that many of us have believed the point of origin was for this knowledge. Most of its expounders wrote in that corrupted form of the Greek used by the Hellenistic Jews and in the Septuagint of the New Testament, and there was a striking analogy between their doctrines and those of the Judzo-Egyptian Philo of Alexandria, itself the seat of three schools, at once philosophic and religious, the Greek, the Egyptian, and the Jewish. Pythagoras and Plato, the most mystical of the Grecian philosophers, the latter heir to the doctrines of the former, and who had traveled, the latter in Egypt and the former in Phoenicia, India, and Persia, also taught the esoteric doctrine and the distinction between the initiated and the profane. The dominant doctrines of Platonism were found in Gnosticism: emanation of intelligences from the bosom of the deity, the going astray in error, and the sufferings of spirits, so long as they are remote from God and imprisoned in matter, vain and long-continued efforts to arrive at the knowledge of the truth and re-enter into their primitive union with the Supreme Being. Alliance of a pure and divine soul with an irrational soul, the seat of evil desires, angels or demons who dwell in and govern the planets, having but an imperfect knowledge of the ideas that presided at the creation. Regeneration of all beings by the return to the cosmos noetos, the world of intelligences, and its chief, the Supreme Being. This reminds me, he's basically saying that the reason that these spirits or intelligences are impure and that they lead people astray is that they have an imperfect knowledge of divinity. So this combination of some knowledge with false knowledge results in imbalanced action and imbalanced intent. Last night I mentioned in the stream that one of my more unpopular ideas is that false beliefs are actually evil. And there are degrees to everything. So I'm not saying that if you have a false belief that is relatively inconsequential, that it's going to result in, death or something. It's not that extreme necessarily, but of course it can be. If you believe that you can put your sins on a zombie and then you're saved and you don't have to change yourself, then that hurts all of society. If you believe false things about woo-based medicine, and I'm not saying that natural medicine or energetic medicine is all woo, but some of it is. And if you believe that it is not, when it is, you can die or someone else might die, So I think if you really go through and evaluate all of the different strains of false belief, you'll discover that they are all evil to some extent. And so this effort, this great revolution that has been prepared for by the ages that appears to be beginning to march has for its aim the amelioration of mankind from despotism and superstition and bigotry and falsehood of all kinds, because truth is light, and it is the only constructive energy in the universe is truth. It is the only thing that, if you bring a handful of darkness into a room full of light, the darkness will vanish when you open your hands. And what's the reverse that, if you bring a candle into a darkened room, you know what I mean? It's that kind of idea. But it's the reason why this stuff is so important, the pursuit of actual truth as opposed to intuitive flights of fancy and, the tendency we have to adopt mick religions and prepackaged dogmas that we find attractive for some reason. Perhaps they're comforting or they offer some solace, but they're just false. And so in the end, they're going to do more harm than good, because instead of having this ineffectual toxic tool, you could actually have taken the time to find something that works and has substance. Pythagoras and Plato, the most mystical of the Grecian philosophers. Is that where we are? Oh no, I apologize. Angels or demons who dwell in... Oh, here. Sole possible mode of reestablishing that primitive harmony of the creation, of which the music of the spheres of Pythagoras was the image. So he's basically saying that it is not until the return, the redintegration of this light back into its source, that we will be totally free of shadow. And that makes sense because if it's true that the veil creates metaphor, that's what the physical world is. It's sort of like a living allegory of the blueprint and the structure of the energetic world that lies behind it. We will always have some degree of shadow in order to have form. So in a current parlance of physics, this is quantum loop theory, where just as in the Kabbalah, the light descended through from Keter down through the different paths in Sephirot to harmonize and crystallize as light. So from light to matter, from matter back to light. That's another interesting fact, that there are a lot of physicists that are getting on board with this quantum loop theory, which suggests exactly what the Gnostics described, the entire process of generation and collapse and regeneration, systole and diastole, the contraction of the lungs of God. Or the Hindus have the idea of the opening of the eye of Shiva, the opening and closing. When God wakes, the universe is destroyed, and when God sleeps, the universe exists. And so there are different variations. Many of them, by the way, have some kind of reference to consciousness playing some kind of role in the process of creation and destruction, which is also interesting. By the way, also, one of the reasons for this sort of like really obsessive tracing of the transmission of these ideas is because it's important to know the lineages so that we also know who wasn't connected. Like, where are the same ideas emerging in disparate cultures? It's more meaningful if in the Western occult tradition, we speak of the left-hand path and the right-hand path in the same way that the people in the jungles of Borneo do, because there is no connection, and yet the practice is the same. Or the circle that the magician and the shaman, whether we're talking about a Sungus in Siberia or a Shuar in South America or North America, well, they may have been connected at some point, so that's a bad example, you see. But these cultures that, have no connection, or at least it's been tens of thousands of years, and when they have the same practices, then we take note of that and say, like, well, okay, got to be a reason why literally everyone casts the circle before a ritual. In a Masonic temple, an ayahuasca ceremony, in the Siberian wasteland or whatever. I don't know about the Aborigines, but I would be surprised if they didn't. And then, they found the music of Pythagoras, the music of the spheres that he predicted a few years back. We discover in them some of the ideas that form a part of Masonry, in which, in the present mutilated condition of the symbolic degrees, they are disguised and overlaid with fiction and absurdity, or present themselves as casual hints that are passed by wholly unnoticed. I don't know if you guys caught that, but it was a reference to the fact that in the lower degrees, the actual secrets and truths are deliberately clothed in absurdity and hidden until the real facts are revealed later on down the line. Aleister Crowley did the same thing. You know, he actually did not believe that spirits and demons had an external existence. He says that over and over again in Magic and Theory and Practice. Most people somehow miss it. I think it's because they don't want to know that, you know, that's not really what it's about. But he said that he used ridiculous terms also in order to confuse and discourage stupid people, like holy guardian angel, you know, that it's not actually a being. It's just a perfected realization of the individual. And so these kind of corny trappings are a deliberate dupe to, you know, a friend of mine that was a very wise man once said he put the horns on it in order to discourage the unworthy. And that's a really good way of explaining what was going on there. The distinction between the esoteric and exoteric doctrines, a distinction purely Masonic, was always from the very earliest times preserved among the Greeks. It remounted to the fabulous times of Orpheus, and the mysteries of theosophy were found in all traditions and myths. And after the time of Alexander, they resorted for instruction, dogmas, and mysteries to all the schools, to those of Egypt and Asia, as well as those of ancient Thrace, Sicily, Etruria, and Attica. The Jewish-Greek school of Alexandria is known only by two of its chiefs, Astrolobulus and Philo, both Jews of Alexandria in Egypt. Belonging to Asia by its origin, to Egypt by its residence, to Greece by its language and studies, it strove to show that all truths embedded in the philosophies of other countries were transplanted thither from Palestine. Astrobulus declared that all the facts and details of the Jewish scriptures were so many allegories, concealing the most profound meanings, and that Plato had borrowed from them all of his finest ideas. Philo, who lived a century after him, following the same theory, endeavored to show that the Hebrew writings, by their system of allegories, were the true source of all religious and philosophical doctrines. According to him, the literal meaning is for the vulgar alone. Whoever has meditated on philosophy, purified himself by virtue, and raised himself by contemplation to God and to the intellectual world, and received their inspiration, pierces the gross envelope of the letter, discovers a wholly different order of things, and is initiated into mysteries, of which the elementary or literal instruction offers but an imperfect image. A historical fact, a figure, a word, a letter, a number, a rite, a custom, the parable or vision of a prophet veils the most profound truths, does not reveal them, and he who has the key of science will interpret all according to the light that he possesses. And now this is another profound difference between this approach and most religious and spiritual approaches, where, you know, someone was telling me today that, you know, you have to abandon reason to come to truth, and I think that's absolutely ridiculous. It's a cop-out. It's a failure. What you are realizing is the limits of your own intelligence, not the limits of human comprehension. It's actually really arrogant for anyone to say that I have run out of interpretive faculty, and so now I don't think there is anymore. You know, like, who is this jackass that thinks his ego is dissolved enough that he is enlightened in creating these scriptures, and he's using his own experience as the metric to define human potential? You know, it's shockingly obvious how stupid and insane it is to put this stuff forward like that. You know, I mean, bit ridiculous. And if the all is mind, then nothing that exists is beyond comprehension. It exists because it has been comprehended by the universal mind. And in some eventuality, human beings will have gained access to the totality of that knowledge. And so, this idea that you must abandon reason in order to have spiritual development, I think is a trap, a pitfall, it's a curse, it's a bane upon humanity, and it's not true. And what happens is it engenders intellectual laziness. And the truth is, if you really want to understand the universe, you have to expand all aspects of your consciousness, which means your intuitive, emotional, and intellectual, all in step with each other. And once you reach the limits of one of those, you have reached the limits of all of those. And if you continue on any of them without expanding all of them, then you'll become unbalanced and you will wind up deluded, and you will fail. So that is why we promote, continuing mathematical education throughout your entire life to understand sacred geometry, not in terms of, interesting tattoo for you to have to virtue signal to other spiritually inclined people of the opposite sex that you are an interesting person or whatever, but to actually understand what the function of that geometry is and the reason why the symbol matters. I gave an example last night of how when you take the philosopher's stone and for example, when you do the lesser brandishing ritual of the pentagram and you add the fifth element, the quintessence, directly above you and you're standing in the center, now draw lines from the square that you have established, because you have a circle first, and in the square is the points are inside of the circle, so they define the size of the square. And those are the four directions, the four elements, the four archangels, all of those things. And then there is a point directly above you. That is the fifth element, which is actually light. People like to call it spirit, but there's no difference. Light is the creature of God that we call spirit. It's light. That's what it is. And so when you introduce consciousness, now you have a three-dimensional space. This universe that you have created that is symbolized by the circle and the square within it, it is just a flat plane that can't sustain life. It can't have any occurrence really in it. It's just geometry. But then when you extend it in this other upward dimension, you have now a pyramid, the most stable geometrical shape known to man. And with the introduction of the eye atop the pyramid, you now have three-dimensional space. And so that is why that symbol is so powerful and ubiquitous. That's what it means. So that's kind of the, the logic because I'm trying to explain this because I know his way of speaking about it is kind of archaic. It's like 1850s, style. So. The Jewish Greek school. No. We had gotten through that. Philo, who lived a century after him. Okay, we got through that too. Receives inspiration, pierces. Talking about piercing the veil. Okay, we are here. Again, we see the symbolism of Masonry and the search of the candidate for light. Let men of narrow minds withdraw, he says, with closed ears. We transmit the divine mysteries to those who have received the sacred initiation, to those who practice true piety, and those who are not enslaved by the empty trappings of words or the preconceived opinions of the pagans. To Philo, the supreme being was the primitive light, or the archetype of light, source whence the rays emanate the illuminated souls. Let me try that one more time. To Philo, the supreme being was the primitive light, or the archetype of light, or the light bearer, the electromagnetic wave that oscillates and generates light. The source whence the rays come that emanate to illuminate souls. He was also the soul of the universe, and as such acted in all of its parts. This is one of the great blasphemies of Christianity and some of the other religions, Islam too, I think. Separating divinity from its creation is like, that's just, why would you do that, And the reality is that it could be that the captains of industry did that because they wanted people to feel like they were sovereign lords of the animals and the wood, and therefore they could rape and pillage and destroy and rumble thee forth and to the land of the unbelieving scum on the other side of the planet, because they don't go for what's in the book, and that makes them bad. So verily we must choppeth them up and stompeth them down, or maybe rent a nice French bomb to poof them all out of existence, leaving their real estate right where we need it in order to build temples in which to praise our God, or whatever it is that they were trying to convince people at the time. But yeah, a lot of Christians will actually get, they'll tell you, if you say I am God, you're Lucifer. Lucifer got kicked out of heaven for that. It's like, well, what about Jesus then? Should we get into that? Have I talked about that enough on this? How, John warns that Satan may come as an angel of light. In the next chapter, Jesus is like, hi, I'm an angel and I am the light. And it's like, wait a minute, weren't we just warned about exactly this? Beware a wolf in sheep's clothing. Wait, you mean the lamb? That sheep? The only people referred to as morning star in the Bible are Jesus and Lucifer. You cannot consider Jesus God without breaking the first commandment. And so if Lucifer got kicked out of heaven for pretending to be God, wouldn't he have just come down here and pretended to be God? And if he was the ultimate liar, or Satan, let's say, because I think Lucifer's a different thing. But if Satan got kicked out of heaven for pretending to be God, wouldn't he come down here and do the same thing and then preach really high morality? Because he's the ultimate liar, right? I mean, derp. Where did that come from, though? I feel like we got a little bit off the... Yeah, I mean, that's just incredible to me, though, that people don't think about that. Because it seems pretty blatant to me. Oh, yeah, well, I was saying, this idea that it's blasphemous to say that you're God, or to separate... or not to separate God from its creation. When people say the rock is God and the tree is God and all the people are God, the Christians are like, that's fucked up, man. You're going to hell for this. Like, wait a minute. That's the kind of thinking that Satan's followers, really, truly evil God, that's how they would think. Think about that. He himself fills and limits his whole being. His powers and virtues fill and penetrate all. These powers, dunamis, are spirits distinct from God, the ideas of Plato personified. He is without beginning and lives in the prototype of time, the aeon. His image is the word, the logos, a form more brilliant than fire, that not being the pure light. It's not the pure spiritual light, but the logos is literally the vibrating, oscillating wave that creates light. That's what it is. It's the oscillation has a symmetry, and it confers, or it compels the chaotic stew of primordial energy to symmetry, which just gives rise to order, and that's what created the early forms that eventually would constitute and create the rest of the universe. The Logos dwells in God, for the Supreme Being makes to himself within his intelligence the types or ideas of everything that is to become reality in his world. The Logos is the vehicle by which God acts on the universe and may be compared to the speech of man. The Logos being the world of ideas, by means whereof God has created visible things, he is the most ancient God in comparison with the world, which is the youngest production. The Logos, chief of intelligence, of which he is the general representative, is named Archangel, type and representative of all spirits, even those of mortals. He is also styled the man type and primitive man Adam Kadmon, the universal man. God only is wise. The wisdom of man is but the reflection and image of that of God. He is the Father, and his wisdom the mother of creation. For he united himself with wisdom, Sophia, and communicated to it the germs of creation, and it brought forth the material world. He created the ideal world only, and caused the material world to be made real after its type. by his logos, which is his speech, and at the same time the idea of ideas, the intellectual world. The intellectual city was but the thought of the architect, who meditated the creation according to the plan of the material city. The Word is not only the creator, but occupies the place of the Supreme Being. Through him, all the powers and attributes of God act. On the other side, as first representatives of the human family, he is the protector of men and their shepherd. God gives to man the soul or intelligence, which exists before the body, and which he unites with the body. The reasoning principle comes from God through the Word, and communes with God and with the Word, but there is also in man an irrational principle, that of the inclinations and passions which produce disorder, emanating from inferior spirits who fill the air as ministers of God. The body taken from the earth and the irrational principle that animates it concurrently with the rational principle are hated by God, while the rational soul which he has given it is, as it were, captive in this prison, this coffin that encompasses it. The present condition of man is not his primitive condition. When he was the image of the Logos, he has fallen from his first estate, but he may raise himself again by following the direction of wisdom and of the angels, which God has commissioned to aid him in freeing himself from the bonds of the body and combating evil, the existence whereof God has permitted to furnish him the means of exercising his liberty. And this is, it's not that direct. This is one of the places where the actual secret is sort of glossed over a little bit, but he does imply it enough that you can kind of figure out where he was going with that. But there are a couple of elements to this. Let me check in with the chat and see how we're doing here. There are a couple of different elements to this. Wow, we have no comments in the chat. Nobody has said anything, or is it like frozen or something? Let me reload that and see. It'd be crazy if you guys have just been, okay, there we go. Yeah, they just didn't load. Is the all within the all? Yeah, I don't know if you asked that question before or after I talked about it. But that, the fact that you can divide a number infinitely, the all is in the all, right? If you zoom into a table with an electron microscope, you can just continue forever and there's just nothing there. The more you zoom in, the bigger it gets. So the all is most definitely in the all. Where was I, though? Because I feel like I had something to... I see. Oh, yeah, we were talking about how evil is actually there to create freedom. And it's not just... Everything in the universe is as it is because it cannot be any other way. The way that is explained in this book is that they are not his laws because they are just because his laws, which means that not in the sense of fair, but the laws of the universe are as they are because if they were any other way, it wouldn't work. It just couldn't happen. It's a born of necessity. Everything is born of necessity. The mother of invention is literally necessity. So... if you think about if everything was confined to order and completely and totally under the jurisdiction of law, then there could be no variation, there could be no movement, there could be no free will, there could be nothing because it is chaos that allows for movement in space rather than this like strict machine cog kind of mechanistic thing that would happen if there was no evil. Basically. And also, if you consider that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, if you think about this in the mystical sense, which is that these things, these universal laws actually apply to all systems, even things that could fall under the category of emotional or intellectual, it's not just a human being that is transient, that lives and dies. It is a civilization, an empire, a tree, a universe, a planet. It applies to literally everything. A thought, all things are subject to these laws. And so equal and opposite reaction, one of the great secrets of the mystery tradition is that it's not just that you have to know evil to understand good. They don't happen without each other. So it is literally evil that begets good and good that begets evil. And it's not some abstract metaphysical concept that is only found in this system. The Buddha talks about it and says that that is why if you want to escape karma, you have to sit and do nothing. Because if you contribute doing good, then the equal and opposite reaction is death. And if you do evil, the equal and opposite reaction is good, so you're still bound to karma. St. John of the Cross realized this, so this is a Christian mystic now, and he said, so should we sin that grace may come? So, you know, the best thinkers in all of the traditions have eventually come to this understanding. It's a tough one for people to wrap their heads around, and it's also dangerous. But that doesn't stop it from being true. The present condition of man is not his primitive condition, when he was the image of the Logos. He has fallen from his first estate, but he may raise himself up again by following the direction of Sophia and of the angels of God. There we go. Combating evil, the existence whereof God has permitted to furnish himself with the means of exercising his liberty. The souls that are purified, not by the law, but by light, rise to the heavenly regions to enjoy their perfect felicity. Those that persevere in evil go from body to body, the seats of passions and evil desires. The familiar lineaments of these doctrines will be recognized by all who read the epistles of St. Paul, who wrote after Philo, the latter living till the reigns of Caligula, being the contemporary of Christ. And the Mason is familiar with these doctrines of Philo, that the Supreme Being is a center of light whose rays or emanations pervade the universe, for that is the light for which all Masonic journeys are a search, and of which the sun and moon and our lodgers are only emblems, that light and darkness, chief enemies from the beginning of time, dispute with each other the empire of the world, which we symbolize by the candidate wandering in darkness and being brought to light, that the world was created not by the Supreme Being, but by a secondary agent, who is but his word, and by types which are but his ideas, aided by an intelligence or wisdom called Sophia, which gives one of his attributes, in which we see the occult meaning of the necessity. Oh, okay. The occult meaning of the... I lost my... The occult meaning of the necessity of recovering the word, and of our two columns of strength and wisdom, which are also the two parallel lines that bound the circle representing the universe, that the visible world is the image of the invisible world, that the essence of the human soul is the image of God, and it existed before the body, that the object of its terrestrial life is to disengage itself of its body or its sepulture, and that it will ascend to the heavenly regions whenever it shall be purified, in which we shall see the meaning, now almost forgotten in our lodges, of the mode of preparation of the candidate for apprenticeship and his tests and purifications in the first degree, according to the ancient and accepted Scottish rite. And all of that is part of the reason why we don't get as much mileage necessarily out of modern spiritual practices as we could. The preparatory phases are not... sophisticated enough, they're not deep enough. People do not undergo psychotherapy before taking up a magical practice as, is really necessary. Before you can manifest your intent and your desires clearly, you must not only know them, but you must have disengaged yourself from self-sabotaging practices, from self-esteem issues, from self-destruction. And if you haven't done that, then these things are going to emerge and attack. So that's part of what he's talking about there in terms of the purification and the preparation for even initiation, rather than just, and this is why, like, for the ayahuasca industry, for example, 3, 5, 2 weeks ayahuasca dieta, 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, then you will be purified. Then you will have demonstrated sufficient. Anybody can do something for 2 weeks. Anybody. But how many of you can not have sex or eat meat for 2 years? Not very many, probably. So, and that is one of the reasons why it goes wrong so often. That people end up with inflated egos, or they find themselves depressed afterwards, and it is motivated by profit motive, because who is going to tell you, come see us in 2 years? It's not a business. So an interesting point to consider, that there should be a lot more that goes into the practices in this development. And also, when you guys realize the extent of the research and the knowledge that has to be gathered and understood, and how much devotion it takes, when you look around the world and you see all these pop culture mystics and metaphysicians and people that think they're shamans and stuff, when you compare them to actual adepts, it's pretty obvious that they're not even remotely what they think they are. This is not, and here's the other thing. It should be common. It should be common. It should be normal. I think that's where we're hopefully headed, that people will overcome all the trappings and pitfalls of the current cultural morass and actually, stand up when they pray instead of groveling on the ground. Philo incorporated in his eclecticism neither Egyptian nor Oriental elements, but there were other Jewish teachers in Alexandria who did both. The Jews of Egypt were slightly jealous of and a little hostile to those of Palestine, particularly after the erection of the sanctuary at Leontopolis by the high priest Onias, and therefore they admired and magnified those sages who, like Jeremiah, had resided in Egypt. The wisdom of Solomon was written at Alexandria in the time of St. Jerome, but was attributed to Philo. It contains principles at variance with his. It personifies wisdom and draws between its children and the profane the same line of demarcation that Egypt had long before taught to the Jews. That distinction existed at the beginning of the Mosaic Creed. Moses himself was an initiate in the mysteries of Egypt, as he was compelled to be as the adopted son of the daughter of Pharaoh Taurus, daughter of Ramses, who, as her tomb and monuments show, was in the right of her infant husband, regent of Lower Egypt. Infant husband? What the fuck? Regent of Lower Egypt, or the Delta at the time of the Hebrew prophet's birth, reigning at Heliopolis. She was also, as the reliefs on her tomb show, a priestess of Hathor and Nuit, the two great primeval goddesses. As her adopted son, living in her palace and presence 40 years, and during that time scarcely acquainted with his brethren the Jews, the law of Egypt compelled his initiation. Yeah, because he was living with royalty at the time, the laws of Egypt compelled his initiation. And we find in many of his enactments the intention of preserving between the common people and the initiates the line of separation which he found in Egypt, Moshe and Ahuran his brother, the whole series of high priests, the council of the 70 elders, Salomo, and the entire succession of the prophets were in possession of a higher science. And of that science, Masonry is at least the lineal descendant. It was familiarly known as the knowledge of the word. Now, what does this thing about the word actually mean? I will tell you, although I probably shouldn't. The consciousness is an electromagnetic phenomenon. And so the logos, this vibration, to recapture and reclaim the word is to gain control of the composition of events in your microcosm, and collectively, if we can get on the same page, the macrocosm. We take possession of the word by gaining control of consciousness itself. It's another way, really, of saying the attainment of the philosopher's stone from the alchemical process. Amun, at first the god of Lower Egypt, only where Moshe was reared, a word that in Hebrew means truth, was the supreme god. He was styled the celestial Lord who sheds light on hidden things. Another thing I should point out about that actually is that think about what he's been saying, and what I was saying from Crowley was saying this last night too. If you take this stuff literally, you're the equivalent of a little kid with fairy tales. when I'm talking about something like the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was, you know what I mean, that kind of stuff. What do you think it's a secret word that you're eventually going to just speak and something's going to happen? Are you 5 years old? Like, what are you talking about? It's allegory. There's a deeper meaning behind it. Of course, it's not a literal word that has to be rediscovered. This is that's just silly. This is the real world, where you have to get control of a force that vibrates, and then you can have some effect on the universe, beyond just speaking something. And this is also what's mean when it's said that if you were able to speak the true name of God, the word that created the universe, it would destroy the universe. And what's actually meant by that is if you met that vibration with an equal and opposite vibration of the same force, that it would destroy it. It would cancel out. And so that's, it's the underlying message there. Amun, at first the god of Lower Egypt only, where Moses was reared, a word that means truth. Amun means truth. Was the supreme God. He was styled the celestial Lord who sheds light on hidden things. He was the source of that divine life of which the crux ansata is the symbol and the source of all power. He united all the attributes that the ancient Oriental theosophy assigned to the supreme being. He was the pleroma, or fullness of things, for he comprehended in himself everything, and the light, for he was the sun god. He was unchangeable in the midst of everything phenomenal in his worlds. He created nothing, but everything emanated from him, and of him all the other gods were but manifestations. The ram was his living symbol, which you see reproduced in this degree, lying on the book with 7 seals on the trace board. He caused the creation of the world by the primitive thought, anoia, or spirit, pneuma, that issued from him by means of his voice or the word, and which thought or spirit was personified as the goddess Nuit. She, too, was a divinity of light, the mother of the sun, and the feast of lamps was celebrated in her honor at Sais. The creative power, another manifestation of deity, proceeded to the creation conceived of in her, the divine intelligence, produced with its word the universe, symbolized by an egg issuing from the mouth of Neph, from which egg came Ta, image of the supreme intelligence as realized in the world, and the type of the manifested in man, the principal agent also of nature, or the creative and productive fire. Man, the principal agent of nature. This is something that I always struggle to explain, because people tend to think of humanity as something separate from nature. And it's true that we may be out of sync in a lot of ways, but it's not possible to be separate from nature. It's not really possible to be, outside of the world. We are a product of it. So in a sense, we are the ultimate arbiter of law, of an expression of nature. And so what we do is still an extension of the will and intent of the universal mind. And that really throws a lot of question on the perception of a lot of people that see like this satanic conspiracy of evil in a world they believe to be ruled by God. And it doesn't quite add up. And so things like population reduction, for example, are an expression of nature, even if it's man doing it and it seems unnatural. It's exactly the same thing as our body getting an infection and being overwhelmed by having too many of these white bloods, red, whatever the virus is, and exterminating part of them in order to save the organism. Or a cancer, Just a little bit more, and then I'm going to wrap this up. And if you want to continue, you can join our Patreon, and we'll be going through the entire rest of the degree, which I think is quite a bit shorter than Degree 28 would probably only take a month or so instead of 4 months. The creative power, another manifestation of deity, proceeding to the creation conceived of in her, the divine intelligence, produced with its word the universe symbolized by an egg issuing from the mouth of Neph, from which egg came Ptah, image of the supreme intelligence as realized in the world, and the type that manifested in man, the principal agent also of nature, or the creative and productive fire. Re, the sun, or central light, whose symbol was a circle with a point in the center, one of the only real symbols of the Illuminati. The point within a circle was the son of Ptah and Tife. I've never heard of that one. His wife, or the celestial firmament, with the 7 celestial bodies animated by spirits of genie that govern them, was represented on many of the monuments, clad in blue or yellow, her garments sprinkled with stars, and accompanied by the sun, moon, and 5 planets. And she was the type of wisdom, and they of the 7 planetary spirits of the Gnostics, that with her presided over and governed the sublunary world. In this degree, unknown for hundreds of years to those who have practiced it, these emblems reproduced refer to these old doctrines. The lamb, the yellow hanging strewn with stars, the 7 columns, candlesticks, and seals all recall them to us in the lodge. The lion was the symbol of Atum Ra, the great god of Upper Egypt. The hawk, or Ra, or Frey, the eagle of Mendes, the bull of Apis, and 3 of these are seen under the platform of which our Masonic altar stands. The first Hermes was the intelligence, or word of God, moved with compassion for a race living without law, and wishing to teach them that they sprang from his bosom, and to point out to them the way they should go, the books which the first Hermes, the same with Enoch, had written on the mysteries of divine science in the sacred characters, being unknown to those who lived after the flood. God sent to man Osiris and Isis, accompanied by Thoth, the incarnation or terrestrial repetition of the first Hermes, who taught men the arts, science, and ceremonies of religion, and then ascended to heaven or the moon. Osiris was the principle of good. Typhon, like Ahriman, was the principle and source of all that is evil in the moral and physical order. Like the Satan of Gnosticism, he was confounded with matter. From Egypt or Persia, the New Platonists borrowed the idea, and the Gnostics received it from there, that man in his terrestrial career is successively under the influence of the moon, of Mercury, of Venus, of the sun, of Mars, of Jupiter, and of Saturn, until he finally reaches the Elysian fields, an idea again symbolized in the 7 seals. That's a wrap. So we are going to continue this next Sunday with my patrons. And so if you would like to continue studying Degree 27, then you are going to have to join my Patreon. I'll hang out for AMA for a minute, but then I'm going to hop over and do a music stream from probably 7 to 10. So if you're into that, nice, Taylor. Yeah, didn't get notified, right? It sucks that they do that to me. But I hear that a lot. All right. Well, I don't see any questions for AMAs, so thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. I hope any and all of you that are not members of the Patreon head right over there and sign up. Do it now. Or you can send me millions of dollars via the options in the chat, or tens or ones even of dollars. Anything helps. So good night, guys. I hope everyone has a fabulous Sunday night.